Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me to this fourth of NGA's new webinar series. I'm Sam Henson, the Director of Policy and Information here at the National Governance Association. Well, I say here, I'm obviously at my house at the moment, but it's great to be here with you virtually today. Thank you so much for joining this webinar, which is all about the curriculum, curriculum cultivation, I've called it, and we're going to be looking at the board's role in helping to drive and foster and enhance curriculum development. So I've got three sections to this webinar today that I want to go through with you: the curriculum definition, the substance of education, and the governing board's strategic role as well. And throughout the session today, I'm also going to be drawing upon the current situation as well that we all find ourselves in, and looking to be making this content as relevant as possible to the current situation. So first of all, what is the curriculum? I think it's a good place to start by saying there is no universal consensus of what the curriculum is. It means different things to different people and different schools. And I want to really look at this from the position of us talking about the curriculum that looks to go way beyond the remit of just a list of subjects, and thinking about how the curriculum prepares our pupils for life beyond the school gates. So the first question really that I want to propose to us all today is, how confident are we in our governance role in the shaping of the curriculum? The curriculum never stands alone. It seeks to condense and to systemize what is needed for our pupils to flourish. And you'll see here from this slide, there are a number of different suggestions from different people across different periods of time who've pointed towards the importance of learning and the curriculum in particular and what it means. Mick Waters, who I know many of you will be familiar with, has described the curriculum as part of the whole fabric of the organisation. And I think it's a really good point for us to come at this subject and bear that in mind as we look at this today, that we want to be talking about the whole organisation and really rooting the curriculum within the organisation's vision and its values. So what is the curriculum? Well, at the simplest level, it is a course of study. So we are looking really at the tools available for our teachers to do their job. The curriculum will vary for many of us depending on our school type, the structure. If you're in a maintained school, you'll obviously be very familiar with the national curriculum, and indeed many academies will be who've opted into the national curriculum. But whilst model curriculums assist, they're not the curriculum in its entirety. They're not to be relied on by themselves. The curriculum, I think, is much bigger, and we will all be familiar as well, I'm sure, with the terms broad and balanced. And I think if you're a maintained school, it's technically balanced and broadly set, whereas for academies, it's broad and balanced. So a very similar set of words there. But the curriculum, I think, goes way beyond that, and the curriculum is more than just a framework. And I think it's really key for us as governors, as trustees, to think about how we have considered the curriculum within our own context and within our own settings. If we come at the curriculum from just the viewpoint of it being a list of subjects, then we really neglect to think about the curriculum in the wider sense, of thinking about curricular approaches, thinking about the full potential of the curriculum. And these are things that I think as governing boards, we sometimes don't make enough time to talk about that. So something that I really want to encourage us all through this webinar. In Scotland, they describe the curriculum as the totality of all that is planned for children's education, which I really like. And obviously, given the current situation that we all find ourselves in, the curriculum has taken a very different turn in recent weeks. The teacher toolkit has changed dramatically, and many of us will already be thinking about what are the conversations we need to be having as governors, as trustees, thinking about where the curriculum goes next. What will it look like when there is some form of normality? And we're going to unpick some of that in as we go through the next slides. So what should the curriculum do? Well, I took these 4 points from the curriculum foundation. I think they're really helpful. First of all, it needs to be rooted in values and have outcomes expressed as aims. It needs to have secure key competencies for learning and life, and secure achievement in the world's major branches of learning as well. As well as ensuring learning takes place in meaningful contexts. And I think this is a really helpful way of thinking about what the curriculum actually means and what its purpose is. The curriculum needs to embody the values of our organisation, our ethos and our vision, and that means the curriculum needs to be flexible, it needs to be energised, it needs to be authentic. And I think for a curriculum to be authentic, it needs to be embedded within our organisation. So I think that's a really important thing for us as governing boards to be able to ask: how embedded is our curriculum within the vision of our organisation? And how ambitious is that vision? And therefore, how ambitious is our curriculum? The curriculum provides a rich learning experience, or it should provide a rich learning experience. And it is connected to both the local and the global context. And I think now more than ever, that point is so prevalent and so key for us to think about how rooted in our local and global context is our curriculum going forwards. The governing board's curriculum knowledge, I think, is something that actually empowers us to hold our key leaders, our executive leaders and our SLTs to account in a confident way. It helps us to establish the reality for our pupils of what actually their learning experience is like. Unless we as governors and trustees are familiar with our school's curriculum, then it's quite hard to do that. So making time as governors and trustees to really get to grips with what our curriculum looks like and what it's centered in is key. So I wanted to have a specific think about the curriculum in the current context. And obviously, for so many of us, we are going through such unknown territory, and we will all be experiencing this in different ways. But our schools across the country have been forced into this unprecedented time, and the curriculum has taken on a whole new role. The curriculum really is now it needs to be more flexible than it ever has been before. And it's important that curriculum in general reflects real life. And so governing boards, I'm sure, across the country will be starting to think about how they seek assurances that the COVID-19 situation is being appropriately incorporated into the curriculum going forwards. And that means building pupil understanding sensitively. It means rethinking how the curriculum helps our children cope with the times that surround them. The OECD recently released a report, and in that report they talked about the current COVID-19 crisis presenting an opportunity for experimentation, envisioning new models of education. Now, I'm sure many of us will not necessarily think of this time as an opportunity, and it's hard for us to get our heads around that at this moment in time. But what has happened is that the education landscape across the country has dramatically changed in a very, very short space of time. And online learning has taken on a whole new meaning for many of us. And online learning has both strengths and weaknesses, as I'm sure many of us are experiencing right now. We already have been today, if we're homeschooling or as we're having those conversations with our schools as well. But online learning isn't comparable to face-to-face learning, and many teachers will need time to adjust. Many pupils will need time to adjust. For all of us, we're very much outside our comfort zones at the moment, and this presents a real challenging time for so many. Pupils will react in different ways, not just right now, but they will react in different ways as there is some form of return to normality, whatever that looks like going forwards. The cost and the time of creating a new online curriculum is something that needs to be considered. And I think as well, many of us will already be thinking about what is the impact of this current situation on our disadvantaged pupils in particular. The most disadvantaged in society are the ones that are often going to be struggling with access to what they need most right now. And so there's some big questions that we need to be asking. Those technological barriers are not just there for pupils either, they're there for teachers, and there'll be a lot of technology frustrations going on right now, I'm sure, as we're moving on through this time. But because of the chaos, there is no doubt an opportunity for a flexing of the curriculum, and that has to happen. The most important thing, I think we would all agree, is that our pupils keep learning in one way or another, and that will look very different in different contexts. Although I think it's worth saying, actually the way our teachers have adapted has been amazing, and I think it's been so brilliant to see, and indeed the way our pupils have been adapting as well. But we need to remember and keep coming back to the point that this is not there is not one way that this journey has been experienced. Actually, everyone is experiencing this differently. Some people will be dealing with a host of different issues, and we need to unpick those gradually as governing boards as time rolls on. So I'm now going to launch a poll around what drives the curriculum development in our own context. So there's a number of options in this poll. I'm now going to launch. I'm going to give it a minute for you to have a look at this. If you could pick one of these options, I'm sure there's many more. I'm only allowed 5, unfortunately. So just whilst that's going, I just want to talk about where I'm coming from on this. So the drivers of our curriculum are more important than ever, both in the current context that we find ourselves in, but also bearing in mind some very recent changes in the not too distant past. It wasn't that long ago that a brand new Ofsted framework came into fruition. So there's lots of things that I'm sure many of us have been thinking about as we consider our curriculum drivers going forwards. So we're almost at the minute mark. I'm just going to let the poll stay open for a few more minutes, a few more seconds, a few more minutes. Not right. I'm going to close it now. Okay, so that's really interesting, and you will hopefully be able to see the results of the poll, as I can. 60% of you have said that your drivers for your curriculum development rest really in your school's vision and values. 31% have said the global, national and local pupil needs. Just 5% said Ofsted, and interestingly, I think for me the most interesting thing here is just 2% said it rested in performance measures and league tables. I think that figure would have been higher going back not too long ago in the recent past. So I think that's really interesting. So thank you for taking part of that, and I'm going to use that. That's a really useful piece of information. So thank you very much. Right. So what drives curriculum development and rationale? Obviously, we've just been talking about that. But just on this point, I wanted to just say that education is not necessarily a simple, straightforward thing. It's a simple, straightforward concept, but actually the way we access education, the way we integrate and react to it, it differs for so many people. And education is a field of ideas and emotions, so it needs an inspiring framework to sit alongside it. And so teachers need to be able to be given that freedom to act within and not simply comply with the curriculum. So I think it's really interesting, actually, looking at that poll, seeing how many of you are rooting your curriculum drivers within your school vision and your values. And I hope that that's a conversation that we can carry on within our own governing boards. It's certainly one that I'm interested in taking forwards, because as we all kind of live through this current experience, and as we go through the next few weeks and months, the curriculum drivers and rationale will be something that I'm sure many of us will be coming back to in the following as time goes by. So moving on, what does inspecting the substance of education mean in practice? Well, the substance of education, I think, is a term that many of us will be more familiar with since the new Ofsted framework came into fruition. And this is all about what is taught and how it's taught, and the intention to return the Ofsted inspection to its proper role. So I know that many of us have different views about Ofsted, but we will, I'm sure, all be keen to see how the new framework is implemented over time. Obviously, at the moment, it's all on pause, but I think it's worth saying here that, generally speaking, the new direction of the Ofsted framework and linking that very much to the curriculum has been broadly welcomed. And I think a lot of people see it as a really positive thing, a real positive move, that inspectors are now looking to have those conversations around the curriculum and conversations around what matters and why, and how do we know. And obviously that's something that inspectors will want to engage with us as governors and trustees on as well. Just a bit more about that in a minute when I talk about NGO's recent research. But just because the framework's changed, that doesn't mean that everyone has to go and suddenly change their curriculum. Lots of you would have already had a curriculum that was fit for purpose and working really well in your context. So let's look at the curriculum in a bit more, from Ofsted's point of view, in a bit more detail. So Ofsted, as they were preparing the new framework, came up with this working definition of the curriculum, which I think is really useful. And more recently, Amanda Spielman has described the curriculum as the yardstick for what school leaders want pupils to know and be able to do by the time they leave school. And I find that really interesting, because that really links into what we at NGA think your vision needs to be as an organisation as well, thinking about where do we want our pupils to be by the time they leave our school. So I think that's a really helpful way of looking at it. The tension here is as more governors and trustees become more ingrained in that curriculum conversation, which is a good thing. There is a tension that sometimes that can pull governors and trustees into a slightly more operational territory, and obviously that's something that can then pull you away from your strategic remit. So we're going to come back to that in 2 seconds. Amanda Spielman's also talked recently, this week in fact, about a rich curriculum not having to just be rich. Doesn't mean it has loads and loads of subjects. Actually, you can have a rich curriculum with fairly limited subjects, is one of the things she was saying. So that's that's probably quite a personal thing. I think, and I'm sure many of us will have different views on that. And one of the things that we've definitely been worried about in recent times is the narrowing of the curriculum, especially in regards to finances. So I think that's something that as boards we need to think about, actually just how broad is our curriculum? Is it broad enough? Is it too broad? And actually, is it broad at the expense of it being rich in content? So thinking about that, I think is a good use of our time as well. So NGA, as I mentioned, conducted some research. Conducted some a study, I should say, a study not too long ago on the new Ofsted curriculum, on the new Ofsted education inspection framework. And one of the things that we found is that whilst there is clearly a renewed conversation on the curriculum itself, the way this links in with the role of the governing board is fairly inconsistent at this moment in time. If you haven't seen our report, do have a look at that. In fact, the link between the governing board and curriculum was fairly minimal in the reports themselves, but for those of you who are familiar with the new Ofsted inspection reports, you'll be aware of the fact that they are quite limited in themselves anyway. But do have a look at our research. It's something that we worked quite closely with Ofsted on themselves. We, in terms of we engaged with them on the findings of that, and we are definitely engaged in a conversation with them into how we take that forwards as well. So the other thing I wanted to say about Ofsted is just to touch on the deep dive nature of the new framework, and that again having that tension of pulling governing boards into the operational sometimes, and that's something that we need to be aware of and resist as well. So just in terms of our staying strategic, the essential role of the board in terms of the curriculum is in providing confident strategy and robust accountability, and that means that we have oversight and assurance that really mirrors what that essentially there is that oversight and assurance there that needs to mirror the confident approach that we need to have as governing boards, and we can only have that confident approach if we are asking these questions about the curriculum and we are clear on what our curriculum is and what it's seeking to do. So we need to be thinking about whether we've had this discussion about the curriculum and that there is a clear attachment there between our vision and values and the curriculum itself. So boards will be hopefully spending time in the future thinking about the curriculum going forwards, and as part of that thought process, one of the things I think we need to think about and consider is just how we're approaching our curriculum and whether we're being risk averse with it or whether we're embracing new opportunities. The situation we find ourselves in at the moment has meant we have been forced really essentially to try different things. Our schools are doing different things and there hasn't been much choice in that. But actually our staff and our leaders need to know that our governing boards are there to work besides them, work with them in having an open and honest conversation about how we develop our curriculum going forwards. And I think one of the key things in that conversations needs to be about who we are speaking to as part of that conversation, whose voices are finding a way into that curriculum development. How does our curriculum development link to our local context? How does it link to the national and the global context as well? How responsive are we to the culture and needs of our students? And I think that's a really big question as well. And I think it's worth saying here that we must equip teachers to interact with curriculum theory. We need to give them the space, the time to do that. And that obviously takes some investment but it's a good investment. That investment in curriculum design and providing that extra space for our leaders to really think about that, I think really tells us a lot about the values of our organisation as a whole. So just another word on governing and curriculum intent. The governing board's role is obviously one that isn't about getting involved with the day-to-day, but is very much centered on that intent and that impact phase that we looked at before. Although I would say, as my slide showed earlier, I do think there is that ongoing monitoring role in the implementation process as well. But as part of all three of those phases, and especially in this intent part, we need to be thinking about how inclusive our curriculum is, or is it a bit exclusive? We need to make sure we're not limiting expectations. So thinking about groups of pupils, thinking about SEND, thinking about pupils who speak English as an additional language, thinking about the pupil premium. Also, on top of that, thinking about our communities and the fact that, you know, my community here in Sutton Coldfield looks probably quite different to wherever you are, unless you happen to be here in Sutton Coldfield, I guess. So we're all in different communities, and our curriculum needs to be sensitive to that. And there's this whole discussion around cultural capital and making sure our pupils are prepared for life. And not all of our pupils will go on to leave school and end up in London or New York or a big city somewhere. Lots and lots of our pupils will leave school and stay exactly where they are, or will move down the road. So we need to be thinking about what our communities need and how does our curriculum factor that in. Just a word on money as well. So integrated curriculum financial planning is something that many of us will become more and more aware of, or have become more and more aware of. And that's really, I think the name is slightly more complicated than it actually is. When we've done some work on this previously, actually when you put it in a simpler term and just say this is really just about making sure that we are basing our spending choices, we're doing that in line with our curriculum choices. I think lots and lots of us are already doing that, but making sure that as governing boards, when we're talking about the curriculum, we are also talking about how it's funded, and keeping those two conversations joined up, I think, is really important. So the national and global curriculum, education during and after this current situation that we all find ourselves in. I've just included a few things here for us to consider. First of all, collaboration at a national level. Many of you will be aware of the Oak National Academy and what is going on there, but that's not the only thing. There's the BBC Bite Size, there's Pearson Online, there's many others. And there's many cases of schools working locally together, of teachers coming together in a way like no other, which I think has been really, really encouraging to see. In terms of what other countries are doing, I think the thing is that, you know, when we look at this, I don't think there's any one country that would say they've got this spot on. There's lots of different things that have been going on. But essentially, this is a time like no other where we can really start to think about how we take the curriculum development on in its journey, and how we look at what other countries are doing, and how we apply this to our long-term thinking. I've heard it said a few times this week that the education sector in this country can sometimes be slightly insular, and that we don't always stop and think that actually education is a global thing. And actually there's lots of conversations out there that we can have with other countries about the different methods that they are using in their settings to ensure that their pupils are receiving an education that really does them justice. So this is a time like no other to start thinking about that. I think the reality is all the countries, the one thing that all the countries have in common is that the curriculum has just had to be more flexible. We are limited, aren't we? We're absolutely limited in what we can do at this point in time. But I think coming together in a way like no other has been really, really good to see. And there's lots of learning that we can take from these other countries as well. So just in terms of being strategic and things to remember from the governing board's perspective, governors and trustees are not expected to be curriculum experts, and I think that there is a tendency. It's easy for us to kind of get overwhelmed. I think sometimes. I know it's certainly happened in my own governing experience when we want to do the best for our schools, but we don't always know everything, and that's fine. Governing is a team thing. It's not something that is about individuals. We're there as a team for a reason, but also we have our experts there on the ground, and I think it's also really crucial to get external perspectives as well, and listen to them. They might have a totally different observation to share with us on how our curriculum is doing. So thinking about that that external perspective, I think, is really important. In terms of evaluating impact and looking at the evidence and going back to triangulating what we've been told, obviously there is a sensitivity about that at this point in time. There's not that much we can do in terms of, none of us can go and do school visits at this point in time. That will change, but at the moment, I think governing boards can still help. There is still an important role, and we need to work closer, incredibly closely with our executive leaders and support them. And I think governing boards have a crucial role in developing that confident messaging that parents and pupils need right now. And I think, we need to assure our pupils and our parents that whilst their learning has indeed been disrupted, that they can come back from this. We will come back from this. We're in this together. And I think that learning can be incredibly flexible and adaptable, and there will be lots of things to come out of this that obviously we're going to have to react to in the weeks, the months, perhaps even longer to come. But actually, there will be some positives, even in these really dark and trying times. I think there will be times when there are things that we can pick up from this, such as the new ways of learning and looking at that more collaborative approach as well. So governing boards can absolutely and need to be part of that confident messaging and having those conversations with our leaders. I think that's incredibly important. We need to be thinking about how the school can continue to be aspirational despite the huge challenges that they are under, how the curriculum will enable that to happen. And that's a huge conversation. I appreciate that. And that's something that we're all going to have to figure out in different ways. But actually, we need to ensure that when the school doors open to everyone, that there is a thought process that's going behind that in terms of how do we adapt the curriculum to fit in with what's just happened, as well as linking with other schools and thinking about the experiences of the community as a whole as well. So just some final reflections. I've got here some different thoughts from people across different thought leaders across the sector and some things that they've said. So obviously the demand on staff to respond during this rare and unpredictable time, but actually we need to look at some of those positives that actually how staff have been adapting, and many of them have learnt to adapt in totally different ways in such a short space of time. I know a few people have said that actually the amount of learning there's been in a matter of weeks, which might have otherwise have taken years, and that's going to be really relevant to that curriculum development going forwards. I think it's worth saying here that many of us might see this as a time when the curriculum's been restricted but actually others have quite helpfully pointed us to the fact that we could view it as a time when the curriculum has been forced to become more flexible and adaptable. And I think that's a useful way of looking at it. This pandemic has opened up conversations about what the curriculum is, how flexible it is, and how it adapts. And that's something that we need to take forwards with us in our respective roles as governors and trustees. I think that is pretty much most of what I wanted to say, but I think I'm just going to end just with that reminder that governing boards do play that crucial role at this point in time in delivering that confident messaging, which needs to be based on our vision and our ambition for our pupils. Our curriculum is rooted in our ambition for our pupils as part of our vision setting, and I think that is perhaps more, well, without a doubt, more important than ever. And governors and trustees are a key part of those discussions as we support our executive leaders through this current time. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for taking part of the poll. I really wish you all a good weekend. If you've joined us live, if you're listening to this on record, then hope you're having a good day, whatever day it is. Yeah, thank you very much.